morning, everybody. So, we are gathered here today to have a very special conversation about stereotyping. Um, I think that some of you may recognize Slew. Slew has been a guest on our podcast before. Would you like to say hello and introduce yourself?
Hello. Um, I go by Slucifer. I've got the Skeptical Satanist podcast that working on rebooting right now, and hopefully have some episodes up by next month. But uh, yeah, I've talked to you about my deconversion and things, and Satanism, and we've had a few conversations and gotten to know each other a little bit. I've got uh, independent fundamentalist Baptist background, and it's got a lot of similarities to the fundamentalist side with the religion you grew up in as well. So
Let
yeah,
me let me just go there. So, like, part of why we're having this conversation is because Slew and I were talking about um, what we were told about each other's religions when we were growing up. And we realized that it's stereotyping. Like we stereotyped each other. And so
right.
then we thought about this and it's like how do we look at each other when we were told, like I thought that they had a funny huklava, which is like a funny belief, and that the people, they just didn't properly like practice. Hey, look at the trees. Good morning.
Hey, Doomber.
um I thought that they were people to be afraid of because I didn't know that there was hope for their souls. So, with that being said, like, what did you learn about Amish people? Like, what was your stereotypes
Oh
about
man.
Amish people?
Um, there were stereotypes that I'd heard you bring up before about like the ignorance, or things of that nature, not educated or knowing, not of the world, so being, I guess, not, that wouldn't be, what would you call that, naive, I guess, or something along those lines. um which I guess you mentioned is kind of on purpose in a way, to influence people to think that they are. um but yeah, and the funny part is a lot of it's hypocritical. Like, a lot of these stereotypes were very hypocritical because our church was just as guilty of it. They had problem with you guys using the roads because of taxes, because you aren't paying taxes to help repair the roads or whatever. Well, you're in wagons that
Let
are,
me let me burst your bubble a little bit.
yeah,
There are Amish people that pay taxes.
yeah.
Let me just burst that bubble a little tiny bit. But
Go
continue.
figure. But regardless, even if that was the case, like, our church didn't pay taxes either. You know what I mean? The tax exemption thing for churches is for all of them. So it's like, what? It was ridiculous. Like, you know, I obviously don't believe these things now, but that was a couple of the things, and they're
Okay, so like the taxes is one thing. Is there another thing?
um there were things about, I mean, some of it was, I guess, the way you guys dressed and stuff, but that's even
What
depending
was
on
it?
where, like, you can't, was it you can't wear buttons or something, or there's something about that? Is that,
Well,
now, is that with all
see,
Amish though?
but here's the thing. Here's the thing. Is like it's not that Amish people can't wear buttons because we had buttons on our men's shirts and their
Yeah.
pants. But women in all five of the communities that I lived in could not use buttons on our clothing. We had to use straight pins, the non fancy straight pins. They weren't allowed to look pretty. Hold on a second. They weren't allowed to look pretty like this. Can you see
Yeah.
that? Or like this. They weren't allowed to look pretty like that. But it's also like indicative of just like how common like stereotyping is, because there's also um, Amish are there's many different brands and flavors of Amish. There's New Order Amish, there's Amish Mennonites, there's Old Order Amish, there's Swartzentrooper Amish, there's a Troyer Amish, there's a Yoder Amish, there's a Byler Amish. There's like a gazillion different sects. So you can't pigeonhole them all into like this.
Right.
Because when you do that, you end up being wrong in what you're believing and what you're talking about. But buttons, okay. Glad to know we could use buttons. I mean,
I
we
mean,
couldn't as vagina havers, but the men. So I'm just saying
uh,
that's actually hilarious.
buttons are for penis havers only. That I mean, that just it always killed me with the stereotypes with those kinds of things anyways, and I guess that could trail off onto other outside of what we're talking about specifically with it. But yeah, the idea that you can pinpoint things down to gender with like colognes and scents, like how does this scent remind you of dicks or vaginas? I don't understand, because they aren't anything to do with these things, you know what I
They're
mean?
they're not.
No, society sexualizes things in so many ways, or
Or
puts them
even
into genders and things. It's so weird.
applies gender roles to toys.
Right. Yeah.
Toys don't have a gender.
Right. They
I
shouldn't.
mean, last I checked, toys don't have a gender, y'all.
Yeah.
They don't have a gender. Thanks. I mean, yeah. So,
But we had other, like, it wasn't just with you guys. I could bring up some other ones where it was like,
go
okay,
ahead.
um well, they would say that churches that use different versions of the Bible other than the King James version, they would say that those were watering down the verses or the Christianity, and um, they would they would say that, like, this was another thing that was in my mind, and I don't know how. It had to have been something that was said by my church and just the community in general, but Quakers, for some reason, I had it in my head that Quakers were these strict fire and brimstone type of people similar to Amish and Mennonites. And like I've known Quakers since, that like I've talked to, that there are sects of them that are so much more lenient than anything that I was ever, or in the sense of the fire and brimstone thing, like it was much worse in my church than what it was in their upbringing or anything. So it's
Yeah,
so weird to see that stuff, after deconverting, seeing these weird, just the
right.
weird hypocrisy of it all that was being strewn about. Catholics was another one. I'd always heard this thing about they were kind of fire and brimstone people and
Oh,
stuff, and
well,
it's like some
those
maybe, but not
Catholics.
many. Like there was a lot of Catholics that were, they went to church way less than what I did, and the preaching and stuff that I was indoctrinated into was, yeah, way.
Yeah. So let me interrupt and say good morning, Ryan. Welcome. I'm glad you're here. Thanks for listening. Um, but also, like, I have to tell you that our preachers would actually preach about the Catholics against the Catholic Church. Just look at the Catholic Church
Yeah,
and see what happened to them. And it wouldn't, like, we didn't have a pulpit. There's no pulpit. You just stand at the intersection between, like, the preachers would stand at the intersection between the living room and the kitchen because we didn't have a church, right? Our homes were our church.
yeah,
And so they would be standing there, and I'll never forget like how they stand there, or they're seen in front of like a group or whatever. Like anyways, so there's like this whole like one big room with like everybody there, and they'd be going on and on and on about the travesties of the Catholic Church and like how bad it is. And like, I don't even remember the things they said, but you know what I do remember? I remember how it made me feel.
I remember it being to the effect that these other denominations of Christians were hypocrites. Like it was almost like
Yes,
trying to push the blame off on them and be like, but look at us though. We aren't.
we're
We're
not
doing
like
this stuff.
this.
Yeah.
Like the let me pat myself on the back. Like
Right.
this, we're not like this. We've done something. We're not like this.
Yeah.
We're not like the Catholic Church. We're not like the Mennonites. We're not like the Baptists. Another one that we had a lot of prejudice against was like the Jehovah's Witnesses. Oh my God, did we ever have prejudice against them? Oh, if the Jehovah's Witnesses come by, you shut the door in their face. You do not talk to them. Sie haben funny glove. They'd be like that funny
So
belief. And if you just talk to them, then they will lead you astray. I'm
I've got a question about that. Did you guys go to like fairs or events and stuff in your county or area or anything to sell goods and stuff, or did you?
oh my no.
No? Okay.
No, that is way too
See,
worldly.
we've had Amish that do that around our area, that they
But
would
we
go
were
to
not
these
those
festivals
Amish.
and
Oh no,
fairs and things.
this
So,
isn't really Dutch.
okay.
Okay.
That's hilarious.
Okay, like no, we were the real old order Amish. Like
Right.
we didn't go that worldly. That just was too far. Okay,
No, we were the real Christians. The
yeah,
true Christians.
but it's like here's the thing: is that when I talk about how did it
So
make
did
me
did you
feel?
guys refer to yourselves as Christians, or was it mostly Amish
Oh
versus
no, we would be
Christians?
abhorred by somebody referring to us as Christians.
So you wouldn't recognize Christianity as being even a part of your religion at all, even though
Like
and that's
I
like
grew
that's
up
the
thinking that Christian was a bad word.
wow. See, we wavered between those things, and it was kind of like
Now I
as
don't.
much as we accused other religions of being wishy-washy, that were basically the same religion that we had, except for one little part tweaked here or there. Like, as much as we did that, we were very wishy-washy on those things. Like,
Yeah. Well, part of me wants to say this though, is there are Amish people that consider themselves Christians, and I want
yeah.
people to know that. But I didn't grow up thinking of myself as a Christian. I grew up thinking of myself as Amish, and Christians are of the world, and they have funny beliefs, and I was afraid of them. I was terrified of them.
See, it was
I was terrified that if I talked to them in an open manner, that they would lead me astray and there would be no hope for my soul, and then I would be forever lost.
See, that was something that they touched on, but it was this thing of like, well, if you have enough faith, then you can go out there and you can preach to them and convert them or whatever. And it's
Oh,
like
but we don't
we got that
proselytize. We
right.
don't do that. I have to say that. We don't
You know,
proselytize.
yeah, yeah. We proselytized. We
Oh,
were
no,
the
no,
church
no. To
that
be born
yeah.
into the church is the privilege and the gift you were given. We were given that privilege and gift. But I think like what's interesting to me, and the reason that we're talking about these beliefs and things that we were taught is that it's stereotyping. It's stereotyping because the stereotype that to be born into the church is like a, a privilege. That's from the church, from within the church. That's beliefs that we hold within the church. And then the stereotype of like all of these people, like Slew here, is of the world. And I just don't know if there's any hope for their soul. So I'm just throwing that out there, Slew. I have grave concerns, right? So, like, how does that affect your ability to connect with people And how does that allow you to have meaningful interactions with people beyond surface level interactions?
Right.
Because if you're going out there and you're being a witness, and I have to ask this, if you're going out there and you're being a witness to the world and you're shining your light and you can convert them, blah, 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 are you ever approaching people from a place of like they are worthy, valid human beings, whether they join your church or not?
Oh, no. No, because everybody's of filthy rags. They're right.
Do you see my rags I'm wearing today? Oh, I got rags on.
Were you did you, like that was one of the verses that they really beat on with their indoctrination was that you're of filthy rags, you aren't worthy of God's, love and forgiveness or anything, but he did this the martyrdom thing. He did this great thing to made this great sacrifice to save you. And yeah, the only people that are going to heaven are the ones that believe that Jesus was the savior that came to die for them and for their sins and stuff. So in that
Twice.
setting, they think that's the only truth and everything, and that's yeah.
Yeah. So twice a year, we had special church services, and they were called Grossman Atningsme. Okay, so Atningsme came first, and Atning means the ordno, the rules church, right? And then, um, secondly, once the rules church was had, then we would have the Grossme, which is translates to the big church. But both of those church services were highly, highly focused on the martyrdom and how Jesus died for our sins. And we're all of like, we're nothing without repenting and believing and all of this stuff. But they were also really lengthy. And the thing about that is that Grossme and Atningsme can go anywhere from like 6 to 8 hours, as in the length of church service. Imagine having like 6 to 8 hours of basically chanting, singing, praying, and hearing about how Jesus suffered. Imagine that. What do you think that did? Girl, Rayon, look, let me show you something. I got a tattoo here. I got tattoos. There you go. My filthy rags
I-
are well done. Don't tell me how to live my life.
right.
You're not my dad. I'm sorry. But I mean, like the effects of that, like when you hold that kind of belief and you have all of this input of like the suffering and how like you're nothing, the effects of that, like how does that affect you?
Yeah. That
And what do you do with that? So like are you approaching people from a belief or a belief that they're
you're
valuable?
no, you're approaching people from an insecure position to begin with. You're insecure with yourself at that point. They've made it to where you're relying on something else for your own worth. You because you aren't worth something, you need to be dedicating your life towards something that is. And that something is God, right? So that it takes away your self-worth entirely. And yeah, that's what forces people like our religion, that was what forced us to indoctrinate other people too, was that we were saving souls, right? So at least that's a worthy cause towards God or whatever. It's putting all of your value on another on authority, basically at that point, which ties into horrible things that can
So if all of your
that
value
line of logic and reasoning in society that can contribute to all kinds of abuse and horrible effects.
so to make sure I'm understanding what you're saying correctly, you said it relies on authority. So this authority that is appointed by God telling you what you're supposed to be doing in life, which is also another human being that's also fallible, just like me or you. We're all
Right.
capable of making mistakes. We're all capable of messing up. We're all capable of screwing it up. We don't always get it right. Nobody is infallible. We don't have that kind of ability as humans. And to be human is really to err. And I don't remember who said that, but it is the truth.
Right.
So where is your humanity in being subservient to or compliant with the rules as appointed to you by somebody who has decided that this is the rule, that
Right.
you must have no value, that you are of nothing, and that this is how you gain value, but you can't really ever gain value because you're never really worthy of any value. Where's the
Such a
where's the
mixed.
logic in this?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, anybody have thoughts on that?
And
Because
I noticed also when I was thinking about all of this, the when we were talking about like the stereotyping from the outs, because we'd split it up, right? We've got stereotyping inside the church between different denominations and everything. And then we've got kind of all of that opposing factors, and then towards society outside of the church as well, because we had our stereotypes against atheists differently than we did against people that were just in a different brand of Christianity, like yourself, or um
oh, but I wasn't a Christian.
oh, right.
I was Amish. Okay.
So yeah, we've got that as well, where we had this idea of the heathens that weren't part of any denomination of Christian, but still they all got thrown in and lumped together at the end of the day because it was just outside of our beliefs and they were going to hell anyway.
Yeah. And and we didn't have the ability because of the stereotyping. And when we understand how stereotyping affects bias and prejudice, which leads to discriminatory behavior. But first, we'll get to that in a minute, but let's talk about this. Ryan says, of course we have no value. The only value we have is when we're given to the church. Nothing is ever enough. It was the purpose of what we were taught. I think you're right. Like it's by design, isn't it?
It's really weird too, because for how much Christianity influenced our country as well whenever it came to politics and stuff like that. I'm not going to go too deep into it, but as far as like the war efforts and things and the propaganda we kind of fed everybody and that was going on at the time, there are things that kind of tie into this as well. You have you kind of have these same stereotypes floating with those things. I'm sorry, I'm about to get off track. Get me back on track, Mary. I've had too much caffeine.
I 100% feel like it's by design. Ancient religions were not as dogmatic, in my opinion. Yeah, I mean, fair enough. I mean, I think it's by design, but it also, like the stereotyping itself, what it does effectively is so you have these, if you have ever read like some of the things that or listened to like Steve Hassan's work, which is like the bite model, if you know about that, behavior control, information control, thought control, and emotional control.
Yep.
Um, the the churches often, the various branches of churches, like the 5 churches that I lived in, it was all done by a variety of ways. So they controlled the way we dressed, they controlled, like, we weren't supposed to have anger because anger is always a bad thing. Never mind the fact that, like, if you read the Bible, Jesus actually had righteous anger. Like,
Right.
so if we're supposed to be like Jesus and Jesus had righteous anger and Jesus did all these things, like, where there's a dichotomy there, like you
Right.
can't, how do you reconcile that?
Well,
How do
and
you, and so Like
Yeah,
we
well, there's this love, fear.
yeah. S-
Weird dynamic there going on that you want to fear this thing and love it at the same time. What I was actually getting to, sorry, I just got back on track with the thought that I had. But when Ryan was talking about nothing is ever enough, it's the purpose of what we're taught. So with
Yes.
that, dictators, unruly dictators, we have this thing in our mind here that we're taught that this is, this is horrible, that that these dictators take over this country, make all these decisions for everybody, implant these things into people's heads and brainwash them into these things. But what's the church is doing those same things, and it's just getting completely
Right.
glossed over.
Right.
And
Because
Christianity is reinforcing all of those. It's the same exact thought processes, and it's in the Bible. It's clear as can be.
well, and then they also like they employ Darvo, which is
Yep.
do you know what Darvo is?
Deny, attack, reverse victim, and offender roles. It's a
Yep.
tactic used by narcissists
Yep.
quite commonly. And yeah, it's funny that there's a narcissistic God that this Bible is based off of. So
I always find it interesting. I find it very interesting because I feel like you know, maybe it's like remember that with great power comes great responsibility. Whoever said that. Why can I not remember things today? But whoever said that was like spot on. Like loving your abuser, as this commenter says, loving your
yeah.
abuser is the definition of an abusive relationship, isn't it?
And
God only hits you because he loves you.
that's
Well,
what I was getting at too. You take it outside of that context and you try to put it into another context, into our reality of what's real and what we know is morally right and wrong, or ethics, or however you want to, like, we've talked
right.
about those getting used interchangeably sometimes. But
Yep.
yeah, you look at it in that context and you say, well, if it's this situation, what makes it different than that one? Why does religion get to be the caveat for these things?
Oh, oh, somebody says, I'm pretty sure God was angry multiple times too.
The
I'm
wrath
just
of
trying to
God.
be
Isn't that
more
something to
godlike.
be, yeah. Isn't that something to be revered, as the wrath of God,
Yeah,
his
yeah.
vengeance? And
I
that's
mean,
talked about a good bit in there too.
hey, hey, we got it. We got it. Somebody knows with great power comes great responsibility is totally from the
It
first
is.
Spider-Man movie.
Oh, it's from the comics, went much before that, but yeah.
Wow. See, this is
Excelsior.
I'm pop culture illiterate. Like I know a few things, but I don't even know where it comes from. But yes, I guess I'm just trying to be more godlike, okay? That's my line now. I'm gonna be more godlike. If you really look at the example that Jesus said in the Bible and you think about it, like he really was a pot stirrer. And if there's nothing else in the world that I am a pot stirrer.
I mean, there was some evidence of there being cannabis residue around one of the places where he supposedly preached. So, uh, archaeologically, so maybe he was a pot stirrer in that sense. I don't know.
I mean, he drove the money changers from the temple with a whip. Like, do you really want to go there? Let's go there. He wasn't like, yeah. Anyways, so there's that. But regardless, I think back to our topic of like stereotyping. So one of the things that we know that happens, um, oh, but first, this is a point. Be less godlike. It only leads to genocide and holy wars. This is true.
Yeah.
So I can't really go there. Darn it. It was funny. Oh my God. He had long hair and wore sandals. Jesus smoked weed. Traveled around with a group of 12 men. I'm just saying.
He
But
smelled like hemp.
I mean, but anyways, we're going out there.
Hemp
So
and
the
false
other
promises.
the
Sorry,
other
let's not
part
go there.
the other part that I think is really important to understand about stereotyping is that how does stereotyping affect people? Stereotyping evokes an emotion that can neither be positive or negative, which then creates bias. And that can be like, for example, if like in the case of like Amish stereotyping, how does this work? With the stereotyping from the outside world of these peaceful, gentle people, what has happened is that when people like myself start talking about the abuse that we experienced, people have this bias and even prejudice. Let me make sure I get this absolutely right because it's really important to me to say it correctly. So they have this bias of they tend to believe because of the stereotypes that they are better than other people, that they are closer to God. And basically, they have a strong feeling of like for Amish people because of it. They believe of them that they are closer to God, that they are better, that they are all of these things because of the stereotyping, because of the positive stereotyping. And so what happens is that if I start talking about my abuse, the people who hold these stereotypes and have this bias and this prejudice, they will literally gaslight us.
Yeah.
They will respond with, but Amish people aren't really like that. They will respond with, but Amish culture is really like this. There are people who have built their entire careers off of the backs of Amish children, dead Amish children. Amish children commit suicide because of this kind of rhetoric, and it goes unnoticed by the outside world.
I even see it to the point of like um oh, there's some quotes and things out there that are kind of they're supposed to be deep and meaningful or whatever, and they got these positive, I call it like toxic positivity, these things that are kind of I don't know, there's this fake sense of positivity about them, and you can see it with like, I hate to do that, I'm going to stereotype again, but like the yoga groups and things, I'll see a lot of it coming out of those
Yup,
groups.
yup.
Um, and it'll often bleed over into like the LGBTQ community and stuff as well, because it's kind of viewed as a more peaceful attitude and things. But at the end of the day, they're kind of doing the same things. They're normalizing these behaviors into those groups is what it is, and
Yes.
it ends up leading to more stereotyping and everything, which is it's harmful. It's normalizing these bigoted ways of thinking, um, and that leads to laws and things being neglectful
Discriminatory.
towards people that are, yeah, victims of abuse and things.
If for nothing else, know this. If you're listening to this, I want you to understand this. Wisconsin versus Yoder is a discriminatory law that denies Amish children basic human rights. That's it. The end. There are laws that create discrimination based off of those stereotypes. Understand that we have to actually talk about these things and we have to spread the word. We have to share this information because if we don't talk about it, the problem doesn't exist. Like, thank you for bringing that up, Slew, that it results in discrimination
Yeah.
because this isn't just like one group or two groups. This law affects many groups of high control religious groups. Wisconsin versus Yoder has denied all of those children basic human rights.
Yeah, and it's unfortunately not just one law or one, there's bill mills out there that are being funded by churches like I grew up in, and legal teams and stuff looking to fight for just their beliefs that are oppressive towards other people. And they view it as protecting their religious, liberties or whatever. And it's
How the
nonsense.
fuck is that culturally
That's
competent?
that's Darvo right there for you.
That is Darvo.
So yeah, it's a very serious topic to get into with these things. And whenever I started trying to think of like these stereotypes of like the outside in towards
Mhm.
Christians, like when I was still a Christian, I was thinking that there were all of these stereotypes going on then of atheists thinking that we were dumb, or the holy rollers, and there's some truth to these things, like, as I think, or I see it as that way for me personally. Like, um I've had people say that I was intelligent and stuff in school, but at the same time, I have a hard time believing that, whenever it felt more like, instead of intelligence, I had this thing of just repeating things or memorization and things. The same way that I was doing with Bible verses, I was doing it with things in school, subjects in school, but it was never in a way that was thinking those things all the way through and knowing why or having any reasoning behind these things, because it was still faith-based thinking that I was relying on at the end of the day. So, like, I almost see that as, yeah, I was dumbing myself down in my faith, and it's hard to get around that. It's hard to not, but those things are attached to a book, an
Oh,
actual thing that has, tells you to ignore.
it's a physical object, which helps people believe and have blind faith, but
Right.
also were you conditioned to believe that?
Yeah.
Were you conditioned to conduct yourself in that manner? And what would you tell somebody if they were experiencing this very same thing?
Right.
I'm saying answer that question. Tell me, what would you tell somebody? Like if I said those very same words to you, what would you say?
Oh, what's that? That
That I feel like I dumbed myself down, but I did these things because that's what I was taught to do. Like,
yeah.
yeah, what would you say to me?
I mean, you were indoctrinated into those things, and that isn't. I don't know. I don't know, because I have trouble with it with myself, so I don't even know what to tell myself in those situations, really. The way that, well, I don't know that it would be appropriate to tell somebody else that.
Yeah.
Let me put it that way, because I have a different way of thinking about it, because it's very personal to me. I don't.
Mhm.
Um. So I think that I kind of have seen it as I was brainwashed into those things, and in that sense, I was putting things together the best way that I could in that situation, I guess.
Mhm.
Um, for survival, I guess, in a way. But they shame.
Do
Yeah,
they shame the
yeah, they
educated?
do. Yeah,
What do you think that results in you? Like, how do you think that
well,
affects like your ability to think about yourself?
okay, so here's the thing. They actually, this is part of that, that I was starting to get into with the stereotyping. I was thinking that atheists, I had this in my mind that atheists were thinking that they were better than us, that they were, smarter and all of that, and they think they're more well educated and things of that nature. And this was actually like a, I don't think that's true now. I don't think that
Do
about,
you Okay, based on our earlier conversation, I have to ask this question. Do you feel like that could have been projection?
yeah, yeah,
That is a
right,
To me, like that is a classic example of projection.
right.
But now you're in a place where you don't see that as being true. And why do you think that's not true? What makes it untrue for you?
Because I'm an atheist now, I don't think that about, you know, Christians now or anything. and I've known plenty that don't. And not only that, atheists don't go by some set of book for their a book of like morals to guide them in these things. So to try to put those things on something like that, you're talking about a multitude of people that with different beliefs on all of that. Whenever I'd come out of Christianity and everything, I had to find a better epistemology for myself to sort through things, to figure out what's right and wrong, what's moral, what isn't, and all of that, because I was taught that only morals and ethics come from the Bible, you know. So going through all of that, other people haven't. Some people don't grow up in the same environment that I did, and they've come to these conclusions differently. So,
Mhm.
Whatever their morals are or ethics are, they could be completely different than mine. And a lot of times they are. So it's a mixed bag in that concept. So I see that now for what
Yeah.
it is. But
One of our listeners says brainwashing and indoctrination is powerful, and once out of that fog, looking back is really strange. That's true. That's why they push to keep you young and dumb, like you're a perpetual child needing the greatest
oh
father
yeah,
figure, God. That's all fine and dandy, but also like going back to the how like your one of the things that I myself experienced was the inability to make decisions. I didn't think that I could make decisions as a result of all of these things that I was taught to believe, the brainwashing. Um, when you when you experience so much brainwashing, you do what you have to do to survive. Your basic survival instincts will kick in.
yeah,
So sometimes I find it helpful to literally sit there and tell myself, I'm not there anymore. I have learned better. I know better. I do better. And I am a better person for not being a part of that church. I have learned tools. I have different tools that I can employ. Which tool would feel best for me right now? Like sometimes that tool is writing. Sometimes that tool is creating art. Sometimes that tool is remaking an Amish dress in a color I wasn't allowed to wear and in a way that I was never allowed to wear it.
yeah,
Sometimes that tool is recreating a quilt block with my real life friends and family, my chosen family, that means so much more to me than the quilt that I made with my egg donor that she refused to allow me to have and instead gave me a quilt that I was brutally raped on. Sometimes it means going out in nature and sitting by the river. It just depends on where I am and what I need in that moment. And I think that when we learn to trust our instincts, we find it easier to employ the toolbox that we now have versus falling back into feeling like we only have the toolbox that we had back then. Does that make sense?
yeah.
And I know that
There's
question, does that make sense, was a trauma response. I'm just saying.
yeah. Um, there's a comment there. Yeah, I was just looking at that one. Yeah,
We
they
were,
keep you in that bubble. I was thinking that too. Whenever somebody else, I'm not sure. 0125AR. I guess we've had a talk in Discord. I don't know which
yeah.
server, but um, when they were talking about that perpetual child needing the greatest father figure, God, yeah, they're putting you in a bubble to protect you in that environment, keep you indoctrinated into it and everything. And I saw it with more some families that had more money in the communities that in my area that were part of the church that had businesses and stuff. They would send their kids to private schools or they would homeschool them so that they weren't exposed to the non-Christian beliefs and things, or um, yeah, things like evolution and all of that. Um, there were a lot of ways that they would keep you in a bubble to try to protect you from other thinking that was outside of their beliefs.
which is like one of the commenters,
It's a
Stefan
cult.
says, we were kept in a familiar environment and away from the community for our own protection. Right. Like it's a separatist attitude that also comes as a result of the stereotyping.
Yeah.
I think it comes from that. Do you think it comes from that?
Yeah. I
Be-
think it comes from that. Well, I mean, we're really talking about tribalism
yeah,
as well. When it, so it's kind of, yeah,
it-
okay.
it's 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 um it's kind of intertwined with what is that word? Colonialism?
Colonialism, like,
I don't know if that's the word like for what I'm thinking of, but it's like how like the white supremacy movement that basically decides value like it's inherently racist and has resulted in mass genocide of people
yeah.
over and over.
I mean,
But
that could be a deep subject to get into.
oh my,
Systemic racism
systemic,
and everything. Yeah.
yeah, systemic racism and everything could be a really, um, yeah. I just think that there's so many intertwining levels that it's really helpful to explore some of those, and where does it all begin? And some of it is because of the stereotyping. This is why we do. Like, do we understand why we believe the things that we believe? And do we understand why we do the things we do? Like, if we hold a belief that, let's just say that disabled people, they need rescuing or whatever, whatever, or like autistic people need to be cured, or like, if we hold those kinds of beliefs, where do they come from and why? What led us to that conclusion? And is there anything that we would change about those beliefs? Because I'm talking about, like, for example, when you start talking about the people that think that autism needs to be cured, and this is kind of off topic, but not really because it's still stereotyping. It's the people who sit there and they do things like they literally kill their own children because of these experimental things that they're doing because they hold such a strong belief that they must have a child that meets the societal norm, and they fail to recognize the humanity in their autistic child, and they kill them, and it happens repetitively. So where did those people's beliefs come from, and what feeds that belief and allows them to sit in that belief to that point?
Not only that, but like, how about the rejection of modern medicine and things as well that happens in a lot of
Oh, there
not
you go.
not just the Amish community, but a lot of Christian communities as well, and that tie
Hmm.
into these things.
Well, let's just talk about like the fact that I mean, I was born at home. If there is like, church in our homes, I was born at home. My grandmother was the midwife. Um, was I born in a church? And as Ryan says, like no blood
And
transfusions.
and again, it kind of the same conspiratorial mindset that it takes for these things. It still seems to be that same thing that we were talking about earlier with people having the religion itself causing this form of like uh, this insecurity
Bias,
in yourself and not being able to. So
bias and
you're kind
prejudice.
of it.
You
They're
have these
feeding on your
feelings.
fears. They're feeding on your fears that they've instilled in you already. They want you to be fearful, and you connect fear with love now. So
So I thought
it's so
that
weird
I
and
thought
creepy.
that the world was filled with people who all they did was sex, drugs, and rock and roll. That was
Yeah.
pretty much it. That's what I thought the
Well,
world
I've
was.
I've heard my pastor bring up there was yeah, there were he had preached on this subject a few times and bringing up that as a stereotype basically for
Right.
worldly things and all of that. Yeah.
And here's the thing. The reason that I escaped is because it was worse to stay there than
Yeah.
it was to escape.
Yeah.
It had to get worse than the fear I had of the world. And then I got to learn from people, like, for example, like one of the people that helped me escape was an atheist. And the thing that I learned from that experience is that people are just people. And whenever you get a group of people, some of them commit crimes or they have values that are incompatible with my values,
Right.
or they have values that, while they're not the same as mine, we are still compatible as having a friendship, a relationship. And that in and of itself was enabled because I had like massive trauma therapy while I was still a teenager. And I'm talking like actual trauma therapy, y'all. I had EMDR therapy when I was 19. And I had intensive EMDR therapy. I can't describe to you what that was like, but it probably saved my life because I understood that due to the actions that the abusive people had taken in my life, and due to the actions of the church leadership, and due to the actions of my own family, that if I stayed in this environment, I was going to die, either by my own hand or somebody else's hand, but I was going to die young. There was no doubt, and there still is no doubt. But the point is that that fear that I had from all of that stereotyping, it took months just to process that fear. And then it took the curiosity to get to see people as humans beyond what I was taught to believe. And maybe you might find it a different way. I don't know. Everybody is different and we all experience things through the lens of which what we have experienced.
I feel like once I kind of removed faith as a concept and things that to take seriously, and whenever I'd found like I started to find stable ground to where I was looking at things more towards like from tools like empathy and compassion, that it's you know those those concepts, having that mindset, it helped a lot with my deconversion. um it kept me grounded in something that wasn't just flagrant, just opinion or whatever. It was being taken on faith. um Sorry, what was that comment that came up? It kind of caught my eye and got me.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's
So,
okay.
one of our listeners says it works for some and not others. I'm from a Mennonite family. I learned to lie about myself early, but when it came to light, I thought it couldn't get better. Life was tough, but I grew stronger and better. Out of 7 kids in my family, only my youngest sister is still Mennonite with 6 kids, and she can have it. Right. That's another thing. I want to point on this because people think that speaking up about abuse means you hate people.
Yeah.
I learned something very important. How we talk about the groups that we were a part of also reflects somewhat, in many cases, how we feel about ourselves. And here's the thing. If I didn't care about my people, I would just go on about my life. I don't have to do this. I would never speak another word about Amish people. I would never speak another word about my life experiences.
I think there's this idea too that it's bad to question beliefs. Like in society, it's kind of been that's something that's been normalized, I think, out of Christianity is that it's wrong to question beliefs. And I think it's that pushback that gives us kind of our morals and ethics to begin with that we can agree on. It's without that pushback, what are you doing? You're just in your little echo chamber of
Are
this
you
is right
ever,
and this is wrong. And
but the more we learn about humanity, the more we know and the better equipped we are to be
right.
able to be empathetic and supportive and compassionate towards one another and to develop meaningful relationships. The more we know, knowledge is what is going to get you to a place where you feel like your life has meaning. Knowledge, in my opinion.
Yeah.
At least that's what got me to that place. Knowledge. Knowledge is power, y'all. I'm just saying. Mm-mm-mm. People.
That's my hippie sibling up there you had.
Hippie sibling up there doing hippie things. I'm pretty sure. I'm
I
pretty
can
sure
tease I can tease them a little bit.
some other people might be doing things like that.
Right.
But regardless, we're gonna have to wrap this up for today. I think we might have to come back and talk some more about different stereotypes. And I kind of think it would be really interesting to see if Rion would like to come talk about stereotypes, and we could do like a Amish versus Baptist versus like JWs. Wouldn't
Oh,
that be
that
cool?
would be great. Yeah.
And if there's somebody else that wants to come, like, even if, like, Stefan, for example, if you want to come talk about Mennonite stereotypes, come on. Like, I think it would be so fun to have this conversation and to kind of highlight the stereotypes that we saw and to understand better how they affect what we do today.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think it would be great. But with that being said, do you have anything you'd like to say to our listeners today?
Um, well, I used to do this a good bit, but I've already talked about my podcast and all of that, but we were talking about this earlier. There's an organization called recoveringfromreligion.org. Um, it's run by Dr. Daryl Ray, or it's been started by him. I don't know who's running it now, but it's a very good organization that if you're coming out of your religion and you need help processing that, they help with those things and they can help. I believe they have tools and things to be able to help you with those things and people there to talk to, because it can be very rough if you're questioning your entire, upbringing and everything, and the things you were taught that were true, and you're finding out that maybe they weren't. It's a very confusing time and very can be very troubling. So I always try to bring them up and tell people to look into that. And there's also tied with that, there's the Secular Therapy Project, seculartherapy.org, where they can help you possibly find somebody in your area that's a good therapist for religious trauma and things of that nature that other therapists might not necessarily understand properly and be able to help with. So, yeah, I want to throw those out there before we end, I guess.
Those are some really good resources. I mean, I think that I would like to thank all of our listeners for being here with us today. And I'd like to thank you for your conversation, Slew. Thank you. Like,
Yeah,
it means a
thank you.
lot to be able to have these conversations. I think it's critical in like changing how we look at things, or, you know, evolving how we evolve as we go through life. And I want to thank our Patreon subscribers for making this episode possible. I appreciate you, and I want to thank the rest of the people who have all worked to make this happen. I think if it wouldn't be for any of you, this wouldn't exist, because all of you have inspired me and many of the people that work with the Misfit Amish to be able to speak. And I appreciate that. And I want everybody to know that Regardless of where you are in life, you are worthy. You are worthy of basic human rights. You are worthy of love, compassion, and empathy. And love does not have to feel like fear. Have a blessed Sunday.